We are going to go ahead. Can you hear me back there? Okay, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get started, even though we expect people will continue to flow in, which is great. But we do want to, make the best use of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out and be here. We really appreciate it. Thank you to people watching the live stream or the recording, taking the time to participate in this process and to be here. I want to thank and acknowledge my colleagues on school committee, Anna Varghese and Amanda Serio. I know that Bouchu and Dr. Selena Miranda are on their way from work and will be here momentarily. Mark Loring is at a previously scheduled work commitment, so he's unfortunately not able to be here tonight. He did help us in our preparation, and this is just one step in a process that will unfold. So we're eager to have this opportunity to share some information with you all and hear some questions and try to provide some further clarity or information as we can. I'm going to start with, did I say I'm Lizzie Carroll? I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous. I'm the chair of the Milton School Committee. I'm going to start with some framing, just remarks, and from there, we will go into a presentation that will sort of pick up on some of what I share in further detail. And after that, we will have Q&A. We are going to be able to take questions up until 6:30, just for your planning purposes. If there are questions or comments we're not able to get to this evening, then there will be other opportunities that we'll share for how you can be in touch with us. As I start, I want to acknowledge that we're in a very difficult situation as a town and as a school district. We require an operational override that, at a minimum, funds level service to avoid devastating impacts on our staff and students. When we refer to level service, which you'll hear several times through this evening, what that means is the budget that would allow us to continue providing the same level of staffing and services that we are currently providing this year, no more and no less. So that's what level service means, and you'll receive more sort of detailed information about that shortly. I want to acknowledge that many in this room and throughout our school district and our town are understandably feeling very fearful and upset about the potential impact of this situation on their jobs and livelihoods, those of their colleagues. Families are scared of how potential cuts would negatively impact the education that our children receive in the Milton Public Schools. Recognizing this extraordinarily challenging context, our goal this evening is to share information that helps people understand where we've been, where we currently are right now, and where we are needing to go. In our overview tonight, we will be sharing the latest information, including many pieces that have previously been shared over the past few months in various meetings of the School Committee Finance Subcommittee, including with the Warrant Committee, School Subcommittee, and also in full school committee meetings. I want to acknowledge as we begin that despite our ongoing advocacy last year to bring a needed override forward to the town for this current year, the select board did decide against that, which only delayed the need by another year. And that's partly what we're here to talk about tonight. I also want to acknowledge that last year, our district faced a challenging deficit, and it was not managed through best practices. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Given all this, it is totally fair for the public to express disappointment and ask how we got to this situation. As a school committee last year, I'm going to be honest and say that we placed too much trust in our leadership and did not sufficiently scrutinize the work that was being done, including by former Assistant Superintendent Pavlicek as he directly managed that situation, or by Superintendent Burrows as he supervised Dr. Pavlicek's work. At the end of FY24, Dr. Pavlicek worked to close a $4 million gap by using several one-time funds that depleted all of the district's reserves. And then we also had to request $400,000 from the town in July to close the gap as the FY24 books were being closed. This was all discussed at the select board in July. This approach of depleting reserves and using one-time funds is not sustainable, nor is it best practice, but it was the only way out of last year's deficit at that time. The budget for this year, FY25, was built off of last year's budget, which contained a structural deficit as well. And this is what happens when a town or a district extends beyond the point at which they needed an override to maintain services. We'll get into more what an override means and how we're at that point. Since joining us in July, Assistant Superintendent Katie Blake has worked diligently to mitigate the residual effects of how this year's budget was built. She manually calculated actual costs that our outdated system was not set up to calculate in order to transparently provide a report in October at the end of the first quarter, which showed we were within budget, but that there were concerning signs of a tightening budget that required careful tracking. This was discussed in school committee finance and school committee meetings. At the end of the second quarter in January, she alerted the school committee that if nothing were to change, she was now able to project a deficit of $2 million for the end of this year. And for the past several weeks, she and Superintendent Burrows have been working to identify action steps that can make up this shortfall and close the deficit with as little impact on staff and students as possible. These steps include a hiring freeze, freezing non-essential purchases, utilizing rollover accounts for increased chargebacks, among other things, and we'll go over that. We now have a viable plan going forward. In building our FY26 budget request, Assistant Superintendent Blake has accounted for the structural deficit that had become a strategy for getting through one year to the next in this phase when we have been needing an operational override for multiple years. We've been discussing details of the FY26 budget request, including the need for an override, in our school committee meetings since November. Meanwhile, we do apologize for not better ensuring as a school committee that information was being more proactively shared internally by Superintendent Burrows with staff along the way to keep them directly abreast of what was being worked on and then discussed in our school committee meetings. We realize that insufficient internal communication has led to increased fear and frustration. And we commit to prioritizing our budget at our meetings and improving our checks and balances going forward. As we have discussed in our meetings, we need to work together as a community now to get an override vote that at a minimum supports maintaining level service going forward. Anything below level service will result in devastating cuts that impact our staff and students directly. It is also important to keep in mind that if we fund no more than level service, we would be unable to make additional needed investments, some of which have already been deferred for years. In preparing to close this opening framing piece, on behalf of the school committee, I want to apologize for our last meeting. We made light of the budget situation for a moment, which was totally unacceptable. We want to assure the public that we do not take this current situation lightly at all. We are all serving on the school committee because we believe our students deserve the best education possible, which means having an excellent and robust teaching staff, leaders, and the resources needed to learn. Our commitment is steadfast, and we want to work collectively to ensure the current budget shortfall is responsibly addressed, and we set the foundation for a better FY26 and beyond. We have the opportunity tomorrow night to meet with the select board about our budget, and then on Wednesday and Thursday, have meetings scheduled with leadership of the Milton Educators Association to respond directly to concerns they raised late last week. We know that our only chance of success is to work together as a school district and a community in order to convince the select board, town meeting, and the voters of Milton to support an override that the town as a whole sorely needs. I'll hand it over now to Superintendent Burrows for a presentation that will provide more detail on this overview I've just shared. And then I think Dr. Miranda and I will wrap up the presentation and open it up to questions. Thanks again for being here.
All right. Thank you, Lizzie. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts before I dig into the slides. I'm going to be talking a little bit about FY24, what happened last year, talk about this year, and then look ahead to next year, and look forward to providing some light to the budget work that we've been doing. Since July, as Lizzie mentioned, when we discovered that our expenditures exceeded our reserve accounts, we have been working to get our focus squarely on getting on stable ground in the midst of our town's financial reality of a delayed override to fund our schools. I understand that many of you are just entering this conversation and that we're in a different place than we were last year when we were discussing an override. As Lizzie mentioned, I want to apologize to all of you for not bringing you into this conversation sooner, as my focus has been squarely on working with school committee, town administration, and select board. So, blind spot. Here is our agenda for this evening that I just mentioned. You've already heard previously that in past presentations about the budget that we spend roughly in the 30th percentile in Milton for education spending. And I think for a lot of people that data point doesn't mean a lot and has not really been influential in budget conversations. But I think the reality that resonates with all of us are the people we know and the incredible work that they do to sustain us in MPS. And this is going to be our focus tonight as we talk about the budget and talk about the values that we hold in Milton and how those are part and parcel of this budget. I am inundated, and I know you all are too, daily with positive news about all of our staff. From how they've stepped up at times of real challenge, put themselves second, went above and beyond, and focused solely on how to support or encourage a student and family in so many ways. I see it every day. Our staff have relentless energy and heart, and it shows in all the interactions they have and in the work they do to inspire learning and wellness in all of our students. we need to fund our mission. The fiscal pressure here in Milton, which has built over the past years and now requires a significant level service override, is driven by cost increases that are significantly outpacing Massachusetts funding formula Prop 2.5. It's critical that as we look ahead, we collectively harness this reality to share with our entire community the absolute necessity of supporting schools, our staff, and our students. Our current financial reality has very real impacts to staff and students, and it's impossible to quantify or express just how impactful the work is of each employee within Milton Public Schools. Spending time in our schools is to see this impact on a granular level, and it is this force that fills this auditorium this evening. Our laser focus needs to be on our students, our staff, and our town. Tonight I'm going to begin by sharing where we are in FY25 as we came out of FY24, and then continue on to talk about the work we've done to build a strong FY26 budget. So as I mentioned in July, we closed out our books, and around the middle of July, we discovered that as we were kind of compiling all the last costs from the fiscal year, we were outstripping the reserve accounts that we had. Those costs were primarily related to special education, but were also due to other line items. I do want to say here, as a little note here, that these are really important services, and when I say special ed services, it's not something to talk about in a have-to way. It's in a need to and a positive way. So I just want to put that out there as we talk about costs. So I mentioned reserves. So for us to close and we use these reserves every year when costs go up and go down, we had to use all of these one-time reserve funds at the end of last year to close our budget. As I mentioned, it came to light in July. This is something that we should have seen coming, and it's why we're in a really different place this year as we look to our current funding, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So FY25, currently we have a structural deficit, which means some of the line items that were built off of either actuals or hopefuls in FY23, which is, that this budget was built in the fall of 23. Those line items weren't high enough, weren't large enough to predict the increase in costs, and there are a few areas that we are struggling with that deficit in this current year. Special ed transportation is one, our sub-coverage line, and utilities. A projected deficit means as we look to the end of the year, and I know there was some confusion, and I think some of us were potentially using words interchangeably. So the projected deficit, again, at the end of the year, what we project our ending fund balance to be. So last year, this whole list was up there, right, where we used all these funds. In this year, we don't have access to all of these funds, so we're having to be more creative in getting this deficit closed. These are things we're currently doing to close the current FY25. FY, sorry, means fiscal year. Sure. So last year, as Lizzie mentioned, we were engaged with the town in talking about the need for an override. It looked like it was headed that way for quite a long time, and then at the end, the town decided to use free cash, which is a somewhat unsustainable way to fund general fund charges. And so we are now in a position in FY26 where that hole grows a little bit bigger each year if you don't bring more taxation into our funding. So we're in need of an operational override, and there are different kinds of overrides. There has been a little bit of confusion because last year it never happened, but we were going to do a debt exclusion override for a new school it was, I think, talked about for November. It then moved. We are now in a completely different process with that. So this is totally different. This is an operational override. And essentially, it allows us to spend more than the cap that's imposed by Proposition 2.5 to fund all of the needs of the school district. So there are really 4 different options as we look ahead. There's obviously a no override. There is an override that provides partial funding. There's an override that does level service, and then an override that would provide level service plus needs. So those are the 4 different overrides that are options, and 3 of them are overrides. 1 is no override. And I'll talk about kind of what those mean in a second. Yeah, that's coming. Thank you. So no override budget, we just get the standard increase from the town. We are still working with the town to figure out what that number will be. It's a percentage increase on our budget. So that's something we are engaged with town administration right now to get that number so that we know what that would be. So for example, the select board decides we're going for an override, it's going to be this big. If that override passes, we get that funding. If the override doesn't pass, we go back to this no override minimum level of funding. So the town, in terms of a no override budget for FY26, a roughly 2% increase in spending. And I'm going to talk about this momentarily. Our level service increase is 9.44%. So it's obviously a lot higher. And I'll talk about why that is. Right now, as I said, we're waiting to get more information to finalize our override budget. We are working on that as a leadership team. The current best estimate in terms of what would happen in the event of either a no override year or the failure of an override to pass, the select board can decide to move forward with an override, or the select board could decide not to, or they could make the amount different, right? So in the event of no override funding, we would be looking at roughly a $4 million in cuts to our current budget, or projected budget for next year, which, as you can imagine, is just huge for when you think about everything that's happening in our schools, and you think about I don't go around to any one of our schools and see like extra people or things that aren't needing to really happen. So the impact is significant. So what happens when there are cuts? So here are some possible impacts. Obviously, class size could be impacted, a reduction of social and emotional supports. Increasingly, schools have taken on a lot of that work that traditionally schools didn't do, and I think it's a huge part of the work that we do, and students can't access learning if they're not in the right space, both mentally and social emotionally. So those supports are critical. Reduction of operations and administrative support, elimination of things like additional buses, and increased fees for optional programming. So a partially funded budget is that override I talked about, which is not up to level service, but a little bit more. And the final line here, it will cost us more taxes to get less services. Meaning we're not taking what we're doing this year and moving it forward to next year. Instead, we're having to do some reductions, but not the full reductions that we would have to make if we had no override. Level service, which you've been hearing a lot tonight, level service is taking everything we're doing now and moving it forward to next year. So here's our level service budget for FY26. And you can see salaries make up a cumulative increase of 5%, and then you can see the different increases there. A number of these additions here are related to addressing structural deficits in our budget. So the percentages are higher than they would be in a normal year. Of course, some of that is pending, what's happening in terms of costs, like with special ed transportation that I mentioned before. Like market-wise, that number has climbed for all districts. So 2.3 of that is addressing those structural deficits, right-sizing the budget. 3.7 are those salary increases, and then the reserves, which I mentioned earlier, which we have depleted, we now have to replenish. And so there's $800,000 to replenish those reserves. So level service means no cuts to staff, no cuts to existing programming. It also doesn't allow us to address any of the needs-based items that you all probably have been in conversation in different, if you're a staff member at your building level or community-wise, talking about our ELA curriculum or things like that. It does not include any of those additions. And then the needs-based budget, this was developed over the fall. It originally included $1.4 million in funding for additional needs for FY26. The ELA curriculum was in there, funding for enhanced teacher professional development, student supports, additional teaching positions, and an HR director. And I think it's clear a needs-based budget helps to expand, to address need, to for some of these things, one-time needs like that ELA curriculum. It's a greater cost this year with an override, a town-wide override that is so high. A needs-based budget looks a little bit different. So Dr. Miranda is going to come up and talk a little bit about working with the town and town finances.
All right, technical difficulties here. So definitely want to talk to you about the FY26 budget. and looking at the override, right? Why is the override necessary, and why is it so large? As you heard already, the implementation of Prop 2.5 limits tax increases even when inflation falls well above 2.5. Now, state and local inflation has averaged 4% per year since Milton's last override. And one thing to note is that the override, it's not simply to fund schools, it's also to fund other town services. Now, we also have had a historical use of free cash and one-time funds by Milton to cover recurring costs, which has led to a structural deficit. Now, the Select Board has also made a decision, and that is to forego overrides to appropriately fund the town over the past 14 years. We have had one override. As we've said already, and you heard, there have been historical budgeting practices on both the town side and the school side that had failed to adequately reflect the actual costs of services, which then results in the structural override. So for schools, we have not budgeted, for instance, enough for utilities. Cost of utilities have gone up. And as you heard, we do have other needs, and special education being one of them that we need to do and we should do. And then for the town, things like snow removal. We have projected less expense than we have actually incurred. Now, the significant increase in unfunded mandated costs associated with special education, for instance, is another thing that we're contending with, and we're definitely not alone in this. If you've been reading the papers, you've been seeing this, that the costs have gone up, but that funding hasn't kept up. In fact, it's shrinking from 40% funding to 14.7% today. And now I will have Lizzie come back.
Thanks, Selena. So this is just the kind of last part of the presentation, and then we'll kind of segue into your questions. We wanted to end this presentation part with like a little bit of regrounding in our values as a district and how that relates to our budget. A school district's budget should be a reflection of its values, of its mission, of its priorities, which in our case have been identified through an implementation plan, an action plan. And so one should want to see alignment between the budget and the work that a district has set out to do. Something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think we're all on different levels thinking about, is, what kind of town is Milton? These are just some of the ways that we think about it. We think we're a town that values education and invests in our students. We think we're a town that takes care of our most vulnerable. We value the skilled employees who provide excellent services through our schools and other departments. And we provide a high quality of life for our residents, and as residents, we expect that living in Milton. We pay for that too. I mean, that's why that's what we're here kind of talking about. We have a high quality of life. I think we're the best town there is. We're next to Boston. We've got the Blue Hills. Don't get me started. I'm sure we all moved here for different reasons or chose to stay here for different reasons. But as we also talked about in the beginning, we have a strong mission as a school district, and that's to educate, challenge, and empower all of our students to be productive, caring, and contributing members of society. And in order to do that, we need to be investing in that work. I want to share just next steps of this process that, this evening is one part of. So here are some of the things that are underway and will continue to unfold. As you heard about, there's ongoing work to close the current projected deficit for this current year, FY25, so that we can end the year on budget. And that is being done with a laser focus on trying to limit impact to students and staff as much as possible. We are going to continue to partner with the select board as a school committee and a district leadership team with the town administration to establish a clear no override budget number. Dr. Burrows spoke about that. We need that number from the town in order to move forward with necessary planning in the event that we do not have an override, either because the select board opts not to put one on the ballot, or it gets on the ballot and the town votes it down. We're going to continue to partner with the select board to establish a clear override budget number if we are having an override. That's something we'll be discussing at much more length with the select board tomorrow night. So if you're interested in that particular topic, please tune in. The meeting's at the Council on Aging at 7 p.m. You can also join that as a hybrid meeting. And that is for the portion of their agenda that is pertaining to the school budget. It's a joint meeting with the school committee. So we will be there. A quorum of the members of the school committee will be there to engage in that discussion with them. And of course, we're going to be continuing engagement with the broader community on our school's needs and the importance of an override for FY26. There will be more opportunities like this to learn, to share your questions and your input with us. It's really important that we move forward together. That is how we will be successful for the good of our students, staff, schools, and the town. We need to work cooperatively. We're thinking about that as a school committee. We're committed to working with our colleagues across the town to move forward. And as I said, we'll continue to seek input from our key stakeholders, our staff, families, and others in the community. These are some upcoming public meeting dates that I just want to make you aware of. So as we've mentioned, we'll be at Select Board tomorrow night. We're working on scheduling additional public forums like this after vacation. Our next full school committee meeting, regular meeting, is on February 26th. Our normal meetings take place in the TV studio here across the lobby, and they're always hybrid, so you can always participate by Zoom. You can watch them on Milton Access TV. We do always have public comment at our meetings. We are in the process of scheduling additional warrant committee meetings. We had a meeting Friday. I don't know what day it is. Friday was our last meeting of the finance subcommittee with the warrant school subcommittee. So those are underway. And we will be having on March 5th another regular school committee meeting, but that will include our annual planned budget hearing, which is another opportunity to come and ask questions and share input. All of this work is leading up to the May town meeting, which is scheduled for May 5th and usually extends for several nights. You can just see here that our finance committee meetings happen every other week or so, and our school committee meetings are usually the first and third Wednesdays of the month, unless there's like a vacation that might move that. All of our meetings are open to the public, and we welcome your attendance and participation in public comment. So with that, we have a little more than 45 minutes to take your questions. We are looking forward and just hoping to have a good, respectful discussion now. I do understand, as I said in the beginning, this is a very difficult topic. It naturally brings out strong emotions. We all have a lot at stake. So we understand that, and let's try to have a respectful discourse about it. We hope the Q&A portion can provide further clarity. You can feel free to ask clarifying questions about any of the information that was shared or other things that are on your mind. And last thing I'll just say, logistics, is if you're interested in speaking, we just ask that you come forward, take a seat like in the front row, and when it's your turn, you can just step to one or the other of these mics at the front of the room. Please introduce yourself for the public record and share your comment or your question with us. Please be concise as possible so that we can try to hear from as many people as possible. And then we'll just do our best, depending on the question, to provide answers. As you see, there's a QR code up here. If you're not the type of person who wants to stand up and ask a question, please still send us your question. You can scan the QR code and it will take you to a Google form where you can enter a question or input that you would like to share with us. You can always email us also. And there's the school committee's email address as well as Dr. Burrows. If we run out of time and there are still people who want to ask questions, then definitely please use the QR code to share your questions with us, and also stay tuned for future opportunities like this. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ayana Quinones. I live at 1 Kaler Ave in the Tucker neighborhood. I have questions about what happened, but more importantly, I'm worried about the lack of community members here. And so my question really is, and my concern is, how are we going to let people know that they need to vote in May? Is there mailings going out? It's not enough to just do an email. We get too many emails. I just happened to stumble upon this one. So it frightens me that this could go really wrong because people just don't know what's happening. So what's the plan for that?
That's a really important question. Thank you for asking that. I don't think in the timeline, one important piece to note is that typically time frame for this effort of an override would be that May 5th town meeting. That week is when town meeting would vote on it. And it would then be, I believe the last time we had an override in, I think 2017, it occurred on like June 20th. So the vote itself is something we would be driving towards in that kind of June timeframe, typically. In the meantime, just from the district, from this side of things, we will be actually soon sending out, I think it says it here, we're going to be sending out an FAQ document to the community that will sort of work to answer some of the questions that have been coming in and that we want to just provide common vocabulary and understanding. So that will be coming to you. You'll start to see, I think, regular updates. So in the past couple of weeks, our principals' weekly updates for, this is Milton Public School current families receive these updates. There's been beginning to be some information there, but the real answer to your question is that for an override, there would be a campaign, and that would be a separate entity from the school committee or the Milton Public Schools or the town. That would be, concerned citizens who come together and do the work of strategizing, messaging. There will be plenty of additional forums. You'll see signs, you'll see ads. And I know that is sort of in process, a group of people that are working on that. So I hope that answers your question, but this forum here, as I said, I think is the first of many of these kinds of events. So we want to continue holding these kinds of forums, and we want to work together with the campaign that we'll get set up to help make sure they have accurate information. We'll be working with the town to do that. The town, by the way, will also be sharing information on its website, which we will also help share, that includes details such as for the average, homeowner of Milton, what do each of these override amounts mean for you in terms of the amount your taxes will go up. That is information that the town administrator calculates once the override amount is set, and that will all start to come out in the next few weeks, if hopefully, as I expect, we will get to the point of agreeing with the select board on an override. So does that answer your question? Do you have additional?
Yes, that answers my question. I just would encourage the school committee to remember our brand. So you the superintendent, spoke really well about, and over again, about what our mission is. That is our brand. And I would expect that the school committee is upholding our brand for the educational system for Milton by making sure that every one of the schools is completely flooded with leaflets or information, like seriously. Like this is a marketing campaign, like for real.
Absolutely. That's great feedback, and I totally agree. And part of it will include working with PTOs to get information out, and yes, that I think you'll start to see in these next few weeks that will ramp up. Okay. And it's necessary. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for the input. So I think people, we can use both mics, and I think people were lining up in the order that they were arriving, so I'll just kind of trust you all to work together to make sure you can all be heard.
Hi, my name's Christian Amaral. I'm a father of 2 daughters here in the schools. And Dr. Burrows, you mentioned earlier that we fall in the 30th percentile of funding for schools. And sort of picking up on your comment about the brand, the previous speaker, one of the things that we purport to feel is really important in Milton is our schools. It's a big part of why people come to live in Milton, and that number just seems crazy to me. So I wondered if you could speak to what other benchmark communities are funding, schools that we don't compare ourselves to and schools that we do, or communities, I should say.
Yeah, it ranges. The state average is 21 something. We're around 18.2, something around that. So yeah, we've been in the 30th percentile for quite a long time. I think that's a pretty consistent number. One of our challenges here is lack of commercial property, which puts more pressure on residential property rates. But yeah, when we look at our DART districts, which are what the Department of DESE compares us to, we are lower than most of them. I think we're higher than one of those. That's 8 districts. So we are not spending, and it's something that I think is something we talk about every year. someone was mentioning in a conversation to me last week, which is why I mentioned it, that they were saying they don't think people really understand what that means. Like, it's not hitting. Like, what hits for people is what they care about, and what they care about is their teacher, they care about their school, they care about like those kinds of things. So that's I think, as we're thinking about like a marketing campaign and thinking about like how do we really communicate this, those are the things that we're kind of trying to think about now, and getting less kind of in the numbers and more in the impact and the people. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Renisha Silva Talbot. I have 2 kids here in the school system. I am also on the PTO at my school. I'm active in the community, and I'm really concerned with, I really like the question by the last speaker about how we're going to get the word out. I mean, I'm surprised by the lack of people in here. The percentage of families, young families growing is high, and there's not any people here, and it's felt to me like there's not been much of urgency for how urgent this matter really is. And Lizzie, you said earlier, like, people move here for different reasons, but I think almost most of the people in here moved here for the schools. And I know I moved here for the schools, thinking that they were going to be like top notch and my kids were going to get an amazing education. And were it not due to some of the amazing administrators like Karen McDavitt and Mel Craven and administrators at the other schools, like, and the PTOs that fund a lot of the budgetary things that the schools can't provide, we wouldn't have that, you know. And it's scary to think that so few people have shown up here. I think so few people knew until like the last weekend when we started just, and this is me personally, not as a PTO member, as a mother to 2 Black children, someone that's concerned about how my children's education is gonna go, because they're already starting behind the 8 ball just because of their skin color. Like, I'm super concerned about this. I'm concerned about the cuts. I'm concerned about the amazing teachers. I'm concerned about the not so amazing teachers that will stay anyways because they have tenure. And then you've got a teacher that's got 1 or 2 years, but they're amazing and they've got fresh ideas, and then they're going to get cut. Just for, I mean, it's mind-blowing to me. But another concern I have is how I'd like to better understand what you mean by mismanagement of best practices. Like, I know what I think that is, but I found like things that I used to thought were black and white are no more black and white, and so seems to be this, it just feels super vague, and like, what are we gonna, how do you ensure us that this doesn't happen again? Or if we do have an override, like, what's to say we're not going to need more? Because what we currently have is just for level funding. I mean, the kids don't have paper in school, and I don't think parents even realize that. You know, I think if more parents realize that, they would be like, what in the actual heck is going on? I mean, the PTOs want to fund paper for the schools, so our kids can, I don't know, probably get more worksheets, but it's something, right? It's something. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about what accountability looks like. Yeah, those are my main concerns that I'd love to have answered. Thank you.
So I can speak to some of this. I don't know if you want to speak to the kind of the public-facing communication. Yeah, I mean, in terms of how we got there, and you were asking about best practices and kind of why we discovered it in July. I think historically we've had a practice of not, because we've had large reserve funds and kept large reserve funds, we were able to manage without needing to know exactly at the end of the year, or really like, you know, in the second quarter, which is kind of when we, this year, when we kind of shared exactly where we were, and that we were running a structural deficit, a projected deficit. In the past, we have basically moved those monies around at the end of the year, those reserve accounts, and closed the books. And so it hasn't mattered as much in terms of looking ahead. And what caught us in 2024 was the fact that some of our costs, and I mentioned a few of those costs, some of those costs just skyrocketed from previously. And so that approach was not able to respond to those increases in costs, which were not in the magnitude of, like, instead of 3%, they went up by 4%. They were like exponentially going up. And so that is essentially what happened. What is different right now is we have a new assistant superintendent who is doing an amazing job at being sure that the numbers that we look at on those quarterly reports are precise. We know exactly where we are. We do have or have had an issue with our software program in terms of being able to predict salaries to the end of the year. And so that's something that Katie Blake did manually to be able to look at and see and get a better sense of where we are. So we have changed those things that we are putting in systems so that they're here. So I think it's all of that is a positive. The not positive part is the challenge of responding to FY24 and not having known it was coming. It doesn't necessarily mean that those funds that we expended, and again, they were mostly special education services, that money would have been spent anyway, but we would have known about it sooner, and then we could have been engaged sooner. And I think that was the big disconnect in FY24.
Thanks. Thank you, Renisha, for everything you raised. It's all very important. I'll just add a couple responses. First of all, just on the folks in the room. So someone just let Bao know there's 400 people watching the live stream right now, which is amazing. 460. Okay, so it's not that I have low expectations of our fellow community members, but we announced this forum less than a week ago. And so I am actually pretty impressed that we have all of you here. And we know this time was not the most convenient, and we were working with schedules and trying to figure out how we could get something happening prior to next week's vacation week. And so I am just thankful that as many of you are here as you are, because it was very short notice. I want to thank the Milton Access TV folks for working to get this actually possible to live stream. And, as I've said, this is the first of, more to come. So I'm actually encouraged by all, the amount of people who are here, who are watching now, and the fact that Milton Access is able to record this right now means that, that will be something folks can watch, after the fact when they have the opportunity. So I think just echoing the answers before about the urgency, as I mentioned, from this point on, we have at our school committee meetings been discussing this very set of topics for months. We've not had a lot of people coming to our meetings. We welcome people to come. And we will continue from this point forward discussing this just more and more, okay? So that's something that we're committing to you. And the urgency, definitely ramps up now. We have this series of really important meetings this week, which are opportunities to make progress. And we have to, so.
Thank you,
Did
Lizzie.
I miss any of the things you had raised?
No, you didn't. I just wanted to say that, the thing is, it's like, it would have been like taking from your savings, like, oh, I'm gonna keep dipping in, and then you're like, oh my God, there's no money in my savings account. Like, what happened to it? Like, your money's getting low, right? So at some point you're like, this coffers are getting low. Like, who raises the alarm? When do they raise the alarm? Like, and we would have, I think to your point about there are 200 people and 400 people online is, we just found out, I think on Friday, like we started trying to get the word out Friday, I think we got an email about this meeting, and there were some rumblings like the Thursday before, so I feel like that's what led to us being here, is because people and most importantly teachers were like, what's going on with our jobs, and people are worried for their jobs, and parents are worried for their kids' educations. So I appreciate that you all are being transparent. I do also wonder what that transparency is going to look like with Glenn Pavlicek. If we knew that this was happening and he was just running amok, basically, and now he doesn't have to take any accountability for it since he's not in this as the finance director anymore. But that's my only other comment. Thank you both for your time.
Hi, my name's Joseph Fahey. I'm a police officer in Milton, and I represent kind of two people here. Myself, the membership of the Milton Police. My wife is a Milton school teacher who is on the reduction of force list. She's newer to the system. So I'm a little concerned that there seems to be no transparency here, because according to the meetings you're having with the buildings, the school employees in the buildings, I'm hearing a number of $4 million for level funded, yet you're going to ask for $6.5 million. It seems you're not able to really manage the money well here now. To ask for $6.5 million is ludicrous. I haven't heard people talk about the number of jobs that are going to be cut between teachers, police, fire, DPW. You're saying to the staff that you're looking at 60 plus. That's just teachers. You're going to lose police, you're going to lose fire and DPW. For you to ask for $2.5 million more than the level funding is outrageous. You're never going to pass an override. And I don't know where you're coming up. You're going to $6.5 million to the staff. Then you're increasing it. You're saying it's a $9.5 million for a town-wide override. No other department is in this situation. If any other department head were in this situation, they'd be fired. You heard not one time have you talked about jobs. Talk about the people in their jobs that might get your override passed. But the way you're doing it now is ridiculous. And as for the amount of people that show up at a meeting, you schedule a meeting at 5 p.m. That's impossible for most people to make. You have to have a little more common sense. But if you're going to ask for $6.5 million, you're going to have a lot of unemployed people. Good luck with it. You should stick to level funding.
Hello, I'm Reagan Gilmartin. I'm a current senior at Milton High School. To Superintendent Burrows and the school committee, you've known about the acute budget deficit for months and neglected to take any serious action to alleviate, or most crucially, to communicate these severe funding issues to the community. Despite admitting that the deficit was foreshadowed by FY 24 and 25, which should have given apt notice to begin crafting action steps. As a current student, I just want to know why it has taken so long to identify, communicate, and begin taking action to solve these appalling budget shortfalls, and how on earth we as a community are supposed to trust any future action you take, considering your incredible lack of transparency.
Thank you. In terms of coming out of 24 and going into FY 25, I worked closely with our assistant superintendent, and we knew at the beginning of the summer, as we started to look at this year, that it would be a hard year. So I totally agree that we saw the potential for a structural deficit coming. In terms of responding to that, the first thing we started to do was to work to basically live within budgets, meaning throughout the school year, there are many, many requests that come into the business office. And it's very challenging because they're all immediate needs, they're right-of-way needs. So the first thing we did to respond to that so that this budget didn't grow was to essentially push back requests and make sure that an approval process was in place so that people weren't just able to kind of spend money without that kind of check and balance in place. As we got to Q1, we talked about, can we project a deficit or not? And we did not. On our first quarter report, which is public record, you can see we did not project a deficit at that time. Between Q1 and Q2, which was in January, we did, and we did share that. And between Q1 and Q2, we started to look at what can we do as we saw that coming, what can we do to start to trim down and basically bring funds back, especially on some of those line items that, as I mentioned, those 3 line items this year, the special ed transportation, the sub coverage, and the utilities, which you can't really do anything about. So we are now, as you can see, like we shared the work that we're doing to close that. We are continuing to work on that and are looking at kind of all avenues to figure out how to close the year strong and then be in a strong position next year. The challenge in a school year budget is that most positions, for example, 81% of our budget are people. Those people, most of them have contracts which go through for the entire year. So we won't riff, it's called. Riffing is when a position is cut. We don't cut positions mid-year for most staff members. So that's kind of.
Why is it so hard to forecast then? If you have a contract and you know what the cost is going to be for the whole year, why is it so difficult for you to know between Q1 and Q2 whether to project the budget deficit?
Katie, do you want to respond to that?
Hi, sorry, I'm not sure who asked. Oh, thank you. The financial system that we utilize, it's actually utilized by both the town and the school. It doesn't have a systemic way to project what the outstanding balances are for salaries. And so I think if you looked at some of the historical quarterly reports, we haven't historically projected out outstanding salary balances. And so I think that gives us a false sense of that we still have enough funding left to be able to cover our expenses. And so in seeing that, realizing that, and knowing that, that was just my effort to do that kind of manual off-book calculation to get a better sense of where we currently stood for the second quarter report. And so that is the work that was done, and that's how we were able to project, based off of that information, where the budget status would be at the end of the fiscal year.
Hi, my name is Rena Dennehy. I am a mom of 5 children, 4 of whom one is in college. I only have 1 child in the Milton Public Schools right now. The other 4 we took out. In 2017, 2018, I was elected to town meeting. I'm a very proud town meeting member. That year or the year after, another town meeting member asked Glenn Pavlicek why in the warrant the school budget is 1 number. That town meeting member was told that it is a very confusing document, much too difficult to understand. And if anyone would like to see it, they can come to Kyle Road and ask for it. That town meeting member is now a school committee member. Maybe the reason people do not come to these meetings and ask questions is because we have been gaslit for years regarding the budget. In 2018, the budget for schools was $47.655 million. Now you're asking for $76 million. That is approximately a 54% increase. If that is not because you misjudge the budget for utilities or snow plowing, please stop gaslighting us. That is not true. You have over-budgeted. If you had increased by 3%, like other town departments, your budget this year would be $60,365,928. You're $14 million above 3%. Stop gaslighting us. Start budgeting correctly. Take care of our children. Take care of our children and the staff, please. And I implore everyone, please join town meeting. We need fiscal moderates and fiscal conservatives. It is not representative of the town as it is right now.
My name is Griffin Angus, and I'm a junior at the high school. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask was that the biggest concern, or one of the biggest concerns, the specific concerns that I've been talking to, and I've been talking to my teachers about the budget, is about the trips to New Orleans and Nashville that you've planned, or that I believe you've already been to Nashville. And I understand it came up in the building meeting with staff at the high school where they were told that it was paid with grants, but my question is, what did those grants pay for exactly in regards to the travel? Did the school spend money on them outside of the grants? Could the grants have been spent on any other school items? And why are you leaving the school during such an important couple of weeks?
So I did go to Nashville for a superintendent training. It's a group called Leading Now, and it rose out of the significant turnover of superintendents in nationally, and is a organization that basically does training on the political realities of this job. It was just for 2 days, and it was completely paid for by them and by me as well.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kierlyn Jones. I'm actually new to Milton, like 6 weeks new, but not new to education. I've had the privilege of working at the local, state, and federal in the past administration in education. And my question is really based off, again, having been here 6 weeks and the meeting about 20 minutes, it's interesting to hear already about budgeting practices and protocol, but more importantly, I'm wondering the likelihood from the 3 numbers that you shared tonight, the likelihood that I and these other lovely people will be back in this auditorium the same time next year. How do your current projections account for a similar deficit and similar happenings with changes to possible federal funding for our neediest and most high-cost students for next year? So it sounds like the number is fluid, maybe, but how do the numbers that we hope to present account for that? And what is the number that won't make us be here the same time next year?
So, I mean, you raised some unknowns around the federal funding. We're definitely keeping an eye on that, and the state, the Superintendent's Association actually sends me updates because they're doing legislative work with the national organization. So we are watching that. That is a real concern, and that's not something we can plan for. We have a number of grants, federal grants that sustain a number of different programs and positions. So that would be a big loss. In terms of the budget and preparing for next year, one of the reasons why it's so high, that 9.44%, is because we have essentially addressed those structural deficits that have been, kind of like taken care of by those reserve funds that I mentioned earlier. So we are working to live within each budget line and not kind of live within each budget line and then kind of add some extra on top to make the difference. Which will then, I think, in terms of like how we wouldn't be here next year, it's then being really clear and really austere so that we are not, our processes are airtight, and we are, we're using every dollar in the way that it needs to be used.
Hi, I'm Katie Scott. I'm a current junior at Milton High School. So one of the most blatant issues I've noticed when talking to my friends about the budget deficit is a significant lack of awareness, uncertainty, and curiosity about the issue among high school students. What have you done or are planning to do to improve this communication error, since it is our quality of education at stake?
Great question. This actually came up, we have student representatives to the school committee, and when we were planning with them at the start of the year, we said one of the best things for you all to do, we talked about a couple things that they could engage in. One was talking about cell phones, and I believe a survey went out or is going out. Has it gone out yet? From students? No? Okay. They completed it, they said. I guess it hasn't gone out yet, but that should be going out to all Milton High School students. We also talked about engaging them to engage other students, because I think it's, for students to understand this, it's better for students to be leading that too. So they are working on that. Bao Chu, who is over here, meets with me and the students on Friday mornings once a month. And then they attend our school committee meetings and share student perspective about different issues that the school committee is talking about. The budget is like a central thing, and I think as we, in the next months, that's, I think, going to be one of their kind of main focuses.
My name is Bill Mullen, and I have two grandchildren in the high school. One of them is a great-grandchild. I've had my two daughters went to Milton High. I went to Milton High, and my wife did. So I have a long-term investment in the public schools of Milton. And historically, we have had a lot of overrides, and a lot of support from this town. It has not always been easy, I think, for the community to come forward, but usually it always has. My question is this. I want some clarity. How is it that if you have a $2.3 million deficit, have you addressed how you're going to actually solve this problem before you go before the select board and ask for an override? Is that something that you've already solved? Because if you haven't solved that problem and you still have a lot of money that you have to make up, I don't know how the town, first of all, I don't know how the select board is going to vote for an override to be on the ballot or anything, because you've got to solve that problem first. And I want some clarity. When you were up here, did you say that was solved? Or is it going to be solved at a certain point? That's the question I think everybody here should have an answer to, because politically, if I remember from what I read in the Milton Times, the chairman of the select board said, you better come back here with some solution about that before you ask for an override. So I hope you can answer that question right now. Thank you.
Yeah. So I did show a slide of the different things that we are doing to close that. We are working towards that 2-0, and right now, with our grasp of the things that we can basically we can reduce in this current fiscal year, we're essentially continuing to work on it. We are looking at getting future reserve funds and bringing them back in. We're looking at that list of 7 or 8 things that we're doing, which is that list in a total is maybe $800,000 or so. So we are continuing to tick away at it. I think the challenge that we face, and the thing that I feel pretty strongly, is I don't want to impact, like looking at what's happening in the spring for students and the student experience. Like, there are things that you maybe could cut, but you really shouldn't cut.
But how are you going to present this to the select board? It seems like, from my impression, I may be entirely wrong.
Yeah.
That the select board would want some type of resolution of this particular issue before they move ahead on addressing the override. What I'm saying is, you have an obstacle.
Yeah.
What you said is you're trying to address it, but I don't have any kind of clarity as to when you're going to address it and how you're going to address it. That's the problem.
That is the problem, and we're seeking that clarity. We don't have that clarity yet. And we are working with the town administration, so they are really helpful in helping us to kind of problem solve. We're looking at doing some things with our food service and custodial in terms of billing back with health insurance. So there are things that we're doing that will, again, it's not going to be the entire amount, but it's helping.
You have to go before the select.
I know.
You're going to have to say that to them.
Yeah.
Colleen, you'll go next. Just a time check. We have time for a couple, maybe 2, 3 more. Colleen, Lindsay, Megan. Okay, Dan. I think we'll have time for, okay. So I think we can, those of you, so I see 4, 6 folks. So we'll be happy to take your questions and comments. And then please, the rest of you, if you still have questions and comments, please do share them with us. So, Colleen.
Yep. Hi, I'm Colleen McCarthy, 108 Oliver Street. I'm a town meeting member. I'm going to be honest, I feel nauseous. And I think I probably express the sentiments of most people in the audience and those listening. We're mortgaging our children. And I just want to make a couple comments, and they're going to be hard, but they need to be said. I'm a daughter of a teacher and a police officer. My livelihood relied on those people putting food on the table for my sisters. So for me to sit here and hear that we have positions in this town, not only teachers, but police, firemen, support services that are potentially going to lose their jobs. And this isn't only Milton residents. Joe Fahey, I learned today, doesn't even live in Milton. You know what? It doesn't matter. He's got a family. This decision, what we decide here, impacts not only our residents, but families. I'm going to also say a hard thing. This wasn't discovered 7 months ago. In 2021, citizens, including myself, were outspoken about the misuse of temporary ARPA funds to fund permanent positions. I was told in a meeting, a subcommittee meeting, myself and one other mom was in attendance, another SPED mother, and I know she's here today and I'm not going to call her out. I was told SPED is fine, Colleen. Is SPED fine, guys? No. Special education and critical intervention was not one that this SPED mom felt to be a priority as part of your strategic planning and certainly not a part of the strategic pillars and strategy of the school committee the past 5 years. Now we are acknowledging SPED is a rising number. We spend $6 million on out-of-district placement as a school district. Why? Couldn't we have tackled some of these early intervention positions early on 5 years ago? Maybe we wouldn't have the SPED concerns and rise that we have today. This is despite the acknowledgement here that SPED costs have been rising and have been. There are people who have been advocating, like myself, for a prioritization of an ELA curriculum to be reevaluated for 5 years. Now, all of a sudden, it's a need-based priority. I've spoken to some of the school committee members in parking lots about this issue, 5 years later. And Superintendent Burrows, I appreciate your leadership, but this predates you. And I am disheartened to know that we got up and blamed people. And this has been going on a long time. Here's another really hard thing that I'm going to have to say. We are 100% in this position because of the distrust of our residents due to a political powder keg and lack of transparency the last 5 years by our school board. There are mothers and fathers in this audience who were labeled "you people" when we advocated our hearts out to get our kids back in school. You people. I think the community deserves to see a line-by-line itemization to the budget. I also would like to understand how top-heavy we are and who all got raises. Why is Glenn Pavlicek still employed as the Director of Human Resources? And what exactly has his role been over the last 5 years? He was someone in that subcommittee meeting who moved ARPA money around, and one of my friends said, "Who are we, Bernie Madoff? Guys, come on. We're moving money around here, okay?" If this software for budgeting is used town-wide, why are other departments not suffering from an unbalanced budget? If you're going to ask my family to look at our budgets line by line, I want to see yours, as Mrs. Dennehy mentioned. I'm also imploring the community to consider people with various backgrounds outside of academics to sit on our board. I'm not going to make a political play right now, but we need people with various backgrounds. If you look at the school board of the best school system in the state, Hopkinton, it is comprised of various backgrounds: engineers, business owners, people who bring a wealth of different types of knowledge, accounting, financing. I also want to commend Anna Varghese, who for 2 years has been talking and pushing for an operational override. And there's been competing interests that have gotten in the way. And I apologize, I'm emotional, but I'm sitting here as a property tax owner, really concerned that my property tax values are going to plummet. Thank you.
My name's Lindsay Bigby. I'm a Tucker parent, and I'm on the Tucker PTO. Tucker being our Title I school, we have the highest number of students who have the highest level of needs. So all of this discussion hits my heart heavy, heavy. In September, the focus was on creating academic experiences. Now, this situation has created a concerning level of distrust in our school and our community. We finally have a principal, We finally have a principal who is dedicated to our community, not only the teachers and families, but our entire community. I've been at Tucker for 4 years. I've had 4 different principals. I have 3 children at Tucker. I'm concerned that we aren't providing her or her staff with enough trust, with enough clear and concise communication in a timely manner. Teachers are hearing stuff from parents are hearing stuff from teachers. It's not coming through. A lot of the teachers are parents, a lot of the parents are teachers. With teachers fearing their loss of their job and worried about the most vulnerable population, their students, it's incredibly hard and unfair to expect them to maintain their high level of teaching. Though knowing the teachers, they'll certainly try. As we continue this budget discussion, What is the plan to build trust in the community, to build trust with the teachers, the staff, the family? Because trust can't wait to be rebuilt for this budget to come through. Trust can't wait for it to be pushed to a vote. Trust can't wait for the election. It needs to start right away. What's the plan to keep everyone up to date continuously, knowing that clear, open, and honest communication needs to at least be the first step in the plan of rebuilding trust?
Thank you. Yeah. I think it's my kind of reflection on just kind of everything that's happened over the last month or so, and kind of thinking about what I thought was being communicated versus what was being communicated, and saying things in public meetings and thinking things are out on the Milton Times, or like that things are out, and not realizing that it's really important to be with people, communicate clearly, and think ahead about what are the consistent things that people need to know. And I think that is what builds trust in both in these kinds of issues and in other issues. It's not just being open and being ready to listen and hear from other people, but it's also being proactive and taking care of people. And that is absolutely my mindset right now as we look at this really, really significant override. And I'm spending a lot of time right now with our principals as we look at building this budget together. And it's very emotional work, because there are so many, the impacts to so many people are so great. Which is, I think, why a lot of people tonight have talked about just the importance of the urgency of getting out there and getting the message out, and it has to happen.
Good evening, Dan O'Neill, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9, past 3 years. I ran for school committee the past 2 years, and I'm running again this year. For the last 2 years, my number one plank was fiscal accountability, and to post expenses on a website that I would host myself of what the school committee is actually spending their money on. It's not complicated. Money is not the answer. Accountability is. Belmont is ranked number 3 in the state, and they spend $17,000 per pupil. It's comparative to what we spend here in Milton with the same school enrollment. But yet Milton is ranked 3rd in Massachusetts, and Milton is ranked 30th. Why? It's not a lack of resources here. It's spending the money where it should be spent. And I'm not here to pile on. I'm here to lend my expertise. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been doing it for the past 28 years for the state of Massachusetts. I've exposed millions, tens of millions of dollars in wasteful spending in school districts around the Commonwealth, towns, building construction projects. I want to volunteer for this town more than just to become a town meeting member. So I thank you for your time.
Craig Piccarillo, daughter in 6th grade in Pierce. My only comment is this level of what people are calling transparency, lack of knowledge, lack of trust. The only thing that's going to bring that back is a forensic audit. Dan, forensic audit. That's what we need. You people obviously have lost your handle on how to do projections. Do you do micro projections? Every school, every department. Are those included? Are those included in the macro budget for the whole town? That's what we need. We need an auditor to come in here, someone who's independent, who doesn't have a political agenda, who's just looking at the numbers and seeing where the money's going. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Frances Canty. I actually have the pleasure of having worked for two different districts. I've worked for Everett Public Schools as well as I currently work for Boston Public Schools. So I actually understand everything you're going through right now because, like you guys, oftentimes the public have hard questions and that we have to find answers to. But because I understand where you're coming from, I know when something is not my wheelhouse. For instance, what I'm really concerned about is when you guys found out there was a budget deficit, what did you guys do? There are programs, there are other vendors that can come and do this work for you guys. You guys shouldn't be in this position right now. The best thing you can do is put systems and processes in place. You know how shocking it is for me to sit here and hear that you guys don't understand your salary projections? That's easy. There's softwares that can do those things for you guys. Why is it Milton Public School? You guys have a renowned public school. You guys don't have the basic structures on how to do budget implementation. That is shocking. I'm shocked by what I'm hearing here because that shouldn't be the case. Those are easy fixes, and it is concerning. You guys asked for a budget increase in 2017. It's only, you guys cannot, what are you guys putting in place to make sure that in a couple of years, I have a kindergartner who's gonna be in kindergarten. In 7 years, am I gonna be standing here again having the same discussion? I'm hoping not. And you guys are in a opportune place to fix some of these things. Like, you guys are in the place of like technology. This is Boston. Like, you're not like in Western Mass, you're here. There are kids at Harvard who can build things for you guys. Like, I can have my team build some stuff for you guys. Like, this is easy work that you guys are not getting, and I don't know why. So I implore you, I really implore you, because I really feel your pain, because unfortunately, like you, I went to a district where we had to take responsibility for financial mishap that happened before us. So I don't blame you, because it's not your fault you weren't here. But from here on now, you have to take accountability for everything that happens going forward. So find the systems. There's a lot of them out there. I can give you some recommendations. Here you go.
I know we have a couple more speakers. I'd like to briefly respond to what you were just saying. We mentioned earlier that in July we were joined by our new Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, Katie Blake. And I think that I've heard consistent feedback from folks participating in our finance subcommittee meetings, with the warrant committee, at the school committee, that she has brought a much higher bar of just frankly accounting expertise, budget management and planning. And I think I just want to assure you that I think that we now have a lot more capacity than we have had. I think Dr. Burrows sort of knew what we needed in Milton, given where we have been for these many years, as has been discussed, and he identified the skill set of Assistant Superintendent Blake. And you know, we have detailed budget presentations that she has provided for us. They are available, and we can reshare those out. I think, as we did reference, the town as a whole continues to use some very outdated practices town-wide and systems, and I think that that's, you know, part of a conversation. But I just want to make sure that you know, and anybody here who has not yet had the opportunity to interact with Assistant Superintendent Blake, that you know, she has raised the bar, and we are benefiting tremendously from the expertise, which is why we are here mid-year now talking about the projected deficit, not in July talking about the deficit that we already have. So I hope that helps, but I hope it just encourages you and others to really continue getting further engaged in the, more nuts and bolts work that's happening around finance. Thanks. I think you're next, and then Megan will end with you. Is that okay?
Hi, I'm Camille DeCaro. I have two sons, one in Pierce and the other one in Collycott. This is my first time speaking. I've been here for about 25 years, and Glenn Pavlicek has been very negative on special education, the way that he has spoken about it for years. In some of the presentations over the past few years, and you did it a little bit tonight, Mr. Burrows, it's a little negative connotation around special education. The numbers continue to increase throughout the district, and I'm really asking for some of that negativity to be toned down in a lot of the presentations, because when you put up on the board around special education, and then the next slide or two you talk about, oh, it's really the transportation around special education. So can we make a differentiation between what is it about special education? Because it's free and appropriate education for these kids. Believe me, my son is SPED. None of them asked for this. They would rather be your typical kid. It's very difficult to raise a child who has special needs. They would rather not be in this situation. So when we're flashing these presentations, if it's about the transportation, say that. Don't just put up there that it's about special education. A lot of kids and a lot of parents don't really know what that means. But Glenn has done this for years. So didn't the predecessor, Susan Maselli. You all did this for years. So I'm asking, on a go forward, please don't do that. You did it tonight because you also corrected yourself. And I sat there and I wasn't going to say anything, but tonight's the first time I'm saying it. So I'm asking you, as the leader of Milton, please don't do it again.
Thank you. Yeah, let me respond to that. I mean, I take that completely, and I agree. I did try to say we had a conversation about this earlier when we were building these slides, and we said, I want to provide transparency to the community in terms of where these costs are coming, but we also don't want to talk about special education costs as something that's a negative or something that is we have to, or that kind of thing where, well, it's just out of our hands, and it is a really bad way to project costs that we believe in, we care about, and that we need to commit to. And the challenge of it is those costs are the ones that have spiked the most and have the most impact on our budget. So we have to figure out, and I'm not saying I've figured this out yet, but we have to figure out how to talk about it to help people understand where the costs are, but we also can't keep pointing like, oh, the problem is special ed. The problem is not special ed.
A lot of this was before you, so the transportation is one piece, but this was, honestly, my next comment was this does predate you. We haven't done a service to our children. We have pushed a lot of folks out of district. You saw it tonight on your slides, because we haven't provided the services and the needs for these kids. We've pushed them out of district, which is a lot of the reasons why those costs has risen. And you heard it from a few speakers before. We need to fix that in our district. A lot of these kids shouldn't be taken out. They're not making any friends. They don't know the kids. They don't even know who some of their friends are. They're not making the connections in their own neighborhoods. We're not doing any service to these kids by making them leave their communities. We're not helping them. We need to help them. You need to help them.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of the things that Danielle Wetmore, who is our Director of Student Services, has lots of really great thinking around and plans around building systems and services here to keep kids in Milton. Our issue right now is space for those. But
yes, and the school committee does as well.
Hi, I'm Amanda. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I'm Amanda Serio, and I'm on the school committee. And I have to say that this has been a point of contention for mine for about I don't know, 8 years when I sat in an override discussion and special education costs were the only thing in red and everything else was in black. And it was as a mom of a child who is out of district, who has been out of district for 8 years, I can completely empathize. I have a very difficult time with conversations where I feel like our kids are vilified. That's what it feels like, that we are the reason for cost overruns or for rising budgets or all of these things. And so I agree. I think we need to focus on finding ways to keep our kids in the community, because they're not part of the community if they're going to school an hour away. But we also need to be very conscious of the language that we use. These are our kids, these are our community members, these are our neighbors, and I recognize that there are costs associated with it, but I think we just have to be kind and mindful of how we talk about it, because they're our kids and they're our neighbors. So thank you for bringing up that point. I really appreciate it, and I think it's something we need to continually think about. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Megan Walsh. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 7. I have 2 children in the Boston Public Schools, Milton Public Schools, one in 7th grade at Pierce, a 9th grader here at the high school. And I come before you. Colleen actually hit a lot of my talking points. But I come here tonight as a band of parents who attended a lot of these subcommittee meetings for the finance starting in 2021. I posted something on Facebook from December of 2022 when they identified $4 million in ARPA funds that was going to hire full-time positions. Now, at that time, these parents were extremely concerned about the learning loss that our children face being out of school for an entire year. At that time, we still had not hired interventionists. The main thing that we needed, we specifically said that if we did not have interventionists, tutors, anything to address learning loss, that we would see a drastic increase in IEPs and out-of-district costs. Where are we today? We are exactly where we said we would be had we not prioritized our children. We had children on the cusp in SPED. They should have been taken care of. They were ignored. So all these parents continue to go to the finance meetings. We showed up here at 8 o'clock on Mondays or Fridays, I don't know what it was. We attended the school committee meetings. We were, like Rena said, gaslit, shunned, called horrible names, mainly because we were concerned about all of our children. And yet again, that money was misappropriated. So what happened to that $4 million? Who's accounting for that? And let's just stop lying that we just found out in 2024. It's been happening every year, but we've been taking free cash, we've been taking reserves to pay for that. So 2022, we had a deficit. 2023, we had a deficit. 2024, we had a deficit. Now we don't have money, and now we're addressing it. It should have been addressed in 2021. So, shame on you. Is there any investigation as to what happened with that? Why did we should never use any sort of grants, free cash to hire permanent positions. That's for one-time funding. So, and what's going to be done about that? What happens with why should teachers who have been here, even if they were here for 6, 7 years, why should they be let go over somebody that was hired with ARPA funds? That's not acceptable at all.
So for ARPA and our ARPA funds, last year's budget carried over from ARPA onto our general fund into this year a number of those positions that we had hired. So those positions are now part of the general fund, part of our budget going forward. That is why last year our increase was over 8%, our budget. And that's kind of one of the challenges, I think, is this year in addressing some of these structural issues, we're also, our budget's also high this year. The use of free cash is something that the town has done to fund, essentially to fund our budgets, and it's not sustainable because those free cash numbers change every year. Last year we had enough free cash to avoid doing an override. I think most people down last year were sharing that we really needed an override structurally, like given the town's finances. So it's, you know, if you prolong it long enough and use free cash to cover all these costs, you get to a point where you can't, the number gets so high to get back to a sustainable budget. And I think in some ways that's kind of the year we're in right now. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem that a lot of these parents and teachers are facing right now. We know that year over year we had a deficit, and we have some leaders who said, nope, we have a balanced budget. That's not a balanced budget. When you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul, that's not balancing your budget. And what Renisha said earlier, when you're saying, oh, just dip from here and dip from there, eventually you have nothing, and if, God forbid, anything ever happened, circuit breaker, we have nothing. It's all gone. And that's just, people need to feel as though we have faith in leadership, and at that point, and we addressed that in 2022. On January 27th, 2023, they addressed a $3.5 million deficit. There was no hiring freeze. We continued to hire even after that. So again, it's like, where are the structural flags in place that say, once we hit this point, which we finally are right now, where they now have a hiring freeze, a purchasing freeze, we can't buy paper, but that should have been done years ago, and why wasn't it? It was continued to roll into the next year, knowing full well we didn't have the money to cover that. So it's just, we need that transparency. We need you to stop saying, we just found out last July. That's not true. We know that we had a deficit year over year. So now you can just say that because we don't have any reserves, no free cash. We have nothing left to bail us out. So now we have to tell the town, sorry, we got nothing left, so now we need an override. We should have had one 2 years ago. It was political, and it was to put the new school ahead of anything.
Thank you, Megan. You shared a lot of really important points. I do recall sitting before the select board about just over a year ago, I think it was, around a year ago, basically begging them to do an override last year. So, you know, I'm there with you on that. Megan was going to be our last speaker. We're coming on 7 o'clock, and Milton Access needs us to wrap up.
That's why I'm here. My daughter's really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I thought you were trying to sneak in one last question or comment. Yes, thank you to our kids in the booth, Milton Access, thank you very much. And thanks again to all of you. And please stay engaged. Please keep sending us your questions and comments, and we will keep sharing information with you. Thank you.